Hello, AP Psychology students, and welcome to Chapter 9 on learning, conditioning, behaviorism. This is one of the more entertaining ones. A lot of fun here. And so learning, just pouring it in, right? We're going to be looking at Section 1 today, which is on classical conditioning or learning. Yay! So let's get into this. Learning is relatively defined as a relatively permanent change of behavior due to experience. And so that's that last part that really kind of changes things. So it's relatively permanent, meaning it's there for most of the time. Sometimes we do forget things. And it's a change in behavior. It's also, a change in outlook and how we think due to experience. Behaviorism, which we know is the symbol we use, the thumbs up. And then, sometimes in class we use that other one, that one finger you get when you don't do a good job driving and you're punished and somebody wants you to stop cutting them off. They give you the opposite of this one. Is the school of psychology that accounts for behavior in terms of observational acts and events. Some people think this is the most scientific realm of psychology because you can observe behavior. It's not in your head, like cognitive approach and, psychodynamic and or psychoanalytic, it's all in your head. This you can observe, and so you can measure and you can actually manipulate like an experiment, and you can have variables. And so to psychologists, behaviorists, this is, like I said, the most scientific portion of psychology. Conditioning is a basic kind of learning that involves associations. And there's two types. There's classical, which involves innate or involuntary behavior. And then there's operant conditioning, which is voluntary behavior or things that we want to do. And they are slightly different, and they can get really confusing, especially when we start talking about negative and positive and all that stuff. And so classical versus operant conditioning is kind of the big kind of thing we look at it in terms of the division between behaviorism and conditioning. Well, we also add in there social cognitive learning theory, where there's what the culture says is what our head says, and then there's also the outcomes or the reinforcements or the punishments that all dictate what our behavior is going to be. Learning also includes changes in our thought, our expectations, our knowledge. There's so much here. I mean, you're learning right now, right? So, classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian conditioning, respondent conditioning, associative conditioning, or Pavlovian learning, classical learning, respondent learning, and all that good stuff. And so Pavlov, you probably heard the story at some point. He rang a bell, and dogs, before they fed it, and the dogs would drool because they were feeding. And then one time they rang the bell, and then the dogs didn't get the food, but they still drooled. And so that's kind of a misnomer. What they were doing is he was actually measuring the salivary reflex, and so they would starve dogs and then blow meat powder into their mouth, and they had like a test tube attached to their mouth so they could measure how much. But then he kind of remarked that the dogs were becoming psychic because every time the scientists showed up to blow the meat powder, they would start drooling ahead of time. And so thinking of that ahead of time, or thinking, wow, he's onto something, we ran upstairs and found a metronome, one of those, and quickly conducted the experiment and the dog associated the meat with the metronome. And then when you pair those two things away and then you take the food away, the metronome would elicit the same response. And so this is Pavlov with his salivating dogs. And the key thing is associations. It's the key element of classical conditioning. Combining a neutral stimulus with one that does elicit a response. Normally a metronome or a bell or a ringtone or like a tuning fork does not make a dog drool. Food does. We do have this reflex. When you put food in our mouth, digestion happens. So the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. And so when you pair those together, then the neutral stimulus can become a conditioned stimulus, and it can elicit the same response as the unconditioned stimulus. So here, The Office, they did this. I'm going to violate some copyright rules. Shh, I can't monetize this anyway. But here you go. This is on The Office. Oh, damn. That's not fine. So the problem with that, there's two types of reinforcers going on. There's actually classical conditioning going on a little bit, and then operant conditioning. By Dwight putting his hand out, that is a voluntary behavior. And the mint acts as a reward, a positive reinforcer, which we'll come back to in some further videos. But his salivation, his awareness of his mouth tasting bad, that is classical conditioning. So the mint, which normally goes in the mouth and creates salivation, a reaction, an innate behavior, is now associated with the reboot. So if you look at it, we can give them terms. The unconditioned stimulus, or the US, can elicit a response without any learning. So food goes in the mouth and you salivate. Loud noises scare you. And so loud noises are an unconditioned stimulus. It increases your heart rate. It kind of makes your breath, a little shorter. I've activated your sympathetic nervous system. Maybe you jumped a little bit. Though that's an unconditioned stimulus right there. So is the food. An unconditioned response is salivation or any involuntary behavior. It's unlearned. It's inborn. Jumping at a loud noise, heart rate increasing, things like that. A conditioned stimulus is when we pair something that is neutral with this, and then if you do it enough times and you can basically associate it with it, then the neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus, and then it elicits the exact same response, which is a conditioned response. So with this, I'm going to associate the country Zimbabwe with that. And so every time you hear Zimbabwe, you're going to get scared. Zimbabwe. And I know that's really, really loud, and it's way better in person, by the way, when I do it in class, because it's super loud. My ears are ringing right now. My heart rate's increasing. And so Zimbabwe by itself is a neutral stimulus. But when I pair it with an unconditioned stimulus, it is now becoming a conditioned stimulus. And now your heart rate is increasing. Just if we do it enough times, it becomes a conditioned response. Now, there are things called instinctual drift. You can train animals. You can train people all this way. But then animals will go back. Even if you give them operant conditioning, you give them rewards, you give them punishments, animals sometimes go back to nature. And we have a very disturbing video for that. And so classical conditioning, this is the big definition, the process by which a previously neutral stimulus acquires the capacity to elicit an innate, meaning you can't control it, response through association with the stimulus that already elicits a similar or related response. Whew, that's a lot. It's really complicated. It seems simple, but when you look at it, it's got to be an involuntary behavior. By the way, this is Pavlov if he was on South Park. Why was Pavlov's hair so soft? Because he conditioned it. Oh, yeah. So here, instinctual drift here. This is a little horrific. If you don't like videos where they're gross, don't watch this. This guy trained. He spent hours and hours with this alligator and trained him. And they have a routine. And, he does this little show, which is really cool. Except for, you're messing with an alligator, and at some point the alligators realize, I'm a predator, so maybe you shouldn't stick things in their mouth. I won't make you watch the whole thing. Not a good idea. Nope, not good. Oh boy. Here comes the death roll. Yep, goodbye. Okay. So, looking at this, food is an unconditioned response. Drooling or salivation is an unconditioned, food's an unconditioned stimulus. Drooling or salivation is an unconditioned response. Before conditioning, before an association or a pairing, a tuning fork does not make a dog drool. But if you put them together and you do it enough times, eventually just ringing the tuning fork will make the dog drool, and the dog is happy. So here's an experiment done at Bowling Green University. It's really simple. Have fun.
Class. I'm David, and I'm going to be testing Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning on my roommate Brian. The conditioned stimulus will be the sound effect. That was easy. And then I'm going to shoot him with this airsoft gun. He will soon learn the relationship between the sound effect and the shot before it gets too hurt. That was easy.
Stares him down the first time.
That was easy.
Might be some bad words here. Sorry, it's for adults.
That was easy. That was easy.
See?
All right, guys. Looks like Pavlov's theory worked.
So, the flinching and wincing in pain was the classical, the conditioned response because of the pain. You could also look at, involuntarily his heart rate increased. So classical conditioning occurs in all species. And it's just I can't hammer this home enough. Behavior is involuntary. You can't control it. Now, extinction. If we remove the conditioned or the unconditioned response, there's unconditioned stimulus from the conditioned stimulus, eventually it'll go extinct. If you rang a bell enough times and did not feed the dog, they'll stop drooling over the sound of a dog or a sound of a bell. And so the conditioned response does not last forever. If you remove the unconditioned response from the unconditioned stimulus from the conditioned stimulus, the conditioned response will go away. So if you do that enough times, if you did the "that was easy" button enough times and did not shoot your roommate, then eventually they'll stop flinching. Just like if I stop saying a certain country that starts with the letter Z and don't pair it with an air horn, then maybe that'll go away, but I'm not ready to do that. Now, spontaneous recoveries, it can all come back all at once. It's just at one point, you're like, it's back, and you don't understand why. So the reappearance of a learned response after its apparent extinction. I have a couple pictures here where I am classically conditioned. As you know, I have an affinity for Mexican food. And usually when I go to a Mexican restaurant, we have some wonderful Mexican music playing, some mariachi music. So that I associate with eating delicious, the greatest food ever invented. So if I hear that music outside of a restaurant, I start drooling and I get hungry. I've had it happen. Cars go by, and I turn to my wife and go, "Do you want to go get some tacos?" And we're both like, "Yeah, I don't know why, but I'm hungry for tacos." We are classically conditioned. So are you. When that bell rings in class, guess what you're going to do? Heart rate increases, you're going to get ready to go. So some other things going on. There's higher order conditioning. A neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus when it's paired with an already established conditioned stimulus. So we have this little thing here. And if I said Zimbabwe, it's going to scare you. But if I said Zaire or zippity doo dah zippity day, you can associate anything that starts with the letter Z, and it's going to increase your heart rate, and you're going to get scared. Plus, I'm holding this. This is really fun in class. I could put it by students and just let them look at it. Then I pick them up and go like, so that's kind of fun to do. You can learn different things. So you can explain why certain words trigger us. Certain words can trigger emotions because they're associated with different emotions that have happened in our past. So this is stimulus, generalization, discrimination. So when similar stimuli produce a similar reaction, that is generalization. So if you are scared by all letters or all words that start with the letter Z, like zoo and Zanzibar and Zimbabwe, then you are going to have stimulus generalization. But if you can discriminate between that, if I say zippity doo dah, zippity dee day, and you don't have an increase in the heart rate, that is stimulus discrimination. So then you can distinguish between two different stimuli. And it's not going to elicit the conditioned response. You can distinguish between who is actually Chad Smith and who is Will Ferrell here. Which one is the actual drummer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers and which one is a really funny actor. And so what is actually learned when we do classical conditioning? It might be an evolutionary adaptation. We're going to talk about in the next section about how fears and anger are classically conditioned. And in fact, pleasure and happiness can be classically conditioned as well. Robert Rescola said it's not merely the association between the two pairs of stimuli, but rather the information that conveyed by one stimulus about the other. The neutral stimulus must reliably signal or predict the unconditioned stimulus. And so we get excited. You guys have animals. You get that box of food out or you shake it and your dogs come running. They get excited, heart rate increases, they start drooling. You do the can opener with your cats and they do the same things. And so they're associating. It's not just the association of that noise of the can opener, but it's the information. That can opener means food. It means I'm going to get fed. And so that's a good thing. That's all I have for this section. I hope your ears don't hurt too bad. Let me know if you have any questions.